I love you, Overlake. I love being with you. I love this journey that God has us on. Hey, my name's Mike, one of the pastors on the team. You might want to do this. Grab your notes out of your handout, and you will see we're wrapping up just a 2-week, 1-2 punch series that last week started with Worship First. This week is concluding with Outlandish Love. And these are the first 2 Sundays in 2013, and we wanted to start this year by getting first things first, and by really going after what is most important. And so these concepts, Worship First and Outlandish Love, we're going to keep going back to again and again, because we want to major on these majors. And so what we're going to do is we're looking at these concepts as a way to build the DNA at Overlake Christian Church. For those of you who are just checking us out, or those of you who have been coming to Overlake for a while, you might know already the purposes that we go after: love God, love people, and serve the world. And we're going to continue to go after those purposes without question or apology. But what these 2 things, Worship First and Outlandish Love, do is they answer the question, how are we going to go after them? This is how we're going to go after all of the purposes that we pursue. This is how we're going to go after all the tasks that we want to accomplish. We're going to do it by worshiping first and with Outlandish Love. So that's kind of where we're going with all this. What I want to do is just jump right in. How does Outlandish Love flow from worship first? Why does it always have to start with worship? Why can't we just start loving or start serving? And the answer, really, there's 2 reasons for it, if you're filling them in. The first is that God is seeking worshipers. God is seeking worshipers. In church culture and American culture today, we talk a little bit about seeking God. We talk about God seekers. I seek God. I sought the Lord. These things are fine. That's great. It talks about the motive and the priority of our heart. But what I want you to see is that God seeks you when you are a worshiper. God is seeking worshipers. Jesus says in John 4:23, "A time is coming, and it has now come, when true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks." Would you circle those last 3 words? The Father seeks true worshipers who worship in the Spirit of God, with God's Holy Spirit dwelling within us, and in truth, that authentically we desire to be the men and women who worship first. That's who God is seeking. You want God to seek after you? Be a worshiper. Now, I also want to say that there is a reality. We want to know God, but we also want to be known by Him. And some of the scariest words to me in all of Scripture are when Jesus talks about a scenario on the last day. And He says that there'll be people that come to Him and brag about all the stuff they did and how they deserve to be with Him in heaven. They'll say, "Oh, Jesus, didn't you know we did this? And didn't you know we did this? In your name, we did this. We did all these good deeds, all these good things. Let us in." And Jesus is going to say, "I never knew you." And it's terrifying to me to think about. I never want to hear those words. I don't want any of us to ever hear those words, "I never knew you." How can you be sure you'll never hear these words? Look what the Scripture says in 1 Corinthians 8:3. "But if anyone loves God, he is known by God." You want to be known by God? Be a lover of God. Be a worshiper. Be a true worshiper. We begin with worship first. First in priority, first in our response chronologically. We want to make sure worship is the first thing that we're going after. We will be known by God. It all starts with worship. That's the first reason. And then secondly, Outlandish Love flows from worship first because of this truth. Because God is the source of all love. God is the source of all love. 1 John 4:7 and 8, "Dear friends, let us continue to love one another." Overlake, so many of you are already loving so well that this is already a part of our culture. It's already a part of our journey. This is not a new idea of love. So the Scripture says, let's continue, right? Let's continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. This is how we know God. We just talked about how he knows us. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. It doesn't say God shows love, although he does. It doesn't say God has love, although he has. It says God is love. It's who he is. And the scripture says anytime we show love, anytime we're being selfless, sacrificial, we're loving, we're pouring ourselves out in love, we are participating in the divine nature. It's who God is. And I say this, I know this is a radical statement, but you have to realize the truth in it, that even people who don't know God, claim to know nothing about God, never even maybe heard the word Jesus, if they truly love, they're pouring themselves out, they're loving sacrificially, selflessly. If they truly love one another, then even if they don't know God, it's God's love that's flowing through them. How? Because God is love. And anytime you're loving, you're participating in who God is, okay? And so we want to make sure that we recognize outlandish love flows from the character of God. It flows from who God is. The source of all love is God himself. So this is why we begin with worship and why it moves to outlandish love. And I just want to say, Overlake, this is a season we are ready to do this. We are ready to engage. We're going to continue to pour love out. I've said this before. I'll say it again. Look, there are all kinds of great churches around here. All kinds of great churches in America, around the world, around this region. And other churches can do a lot of great things. Things even better than Overlake can do. So I'm okay if another church can do, say, theology better than we can. That's okay with me. I'm okay if there's another church that can do systems better than we can. I'm sure there are several things that other churches can do better than Overlake. But Overlake, I don't want anyone anywhere to love better than we love. That's the DNA. That's who we are. That's the journey that we're on. We're going to love outlandishly. Okay. Now, if you're here and you're like, nah, I don't, love, that sounds a little too, touchy-feely for me. Well, okay, I can only say that buckle up because we're going to keep going after it, all right? And I want you to remember the definition of outlandish. Outlandish means strikingly out of the ordinary, right? Like a costume. Oh, that's an outlandish getup, right? Or, look at the second phrase, exceeding proper or reasonable limits or standards, in no way a proportional response. Isn't that awesome? So that's the kind of love that we're going to pour out, in no way proportional. It's not expected. It exceeds all limits and expectations. And so I want to give you just a little bit of a visual, and you'll have to sort of track with me. Think about love sort of on a meter scale here, okay? So our love, sort of at this level, it's just what I would call proportional love. It's fair, it's just, it's polite, it's nice. Does that make sense? So right here, it's just kind of regular love. And that's a good thing, and I'll unpack that a little bit more in a second. Below that level, so down here, this is not nice, okay? This is impolite. This is where we live selfish, as takers, as entitled, right? That's where we are down here. So for some of you, that's sort of where you are. That's your default. That's just how you approach life. And if that's where you are, then really lovingly, I want to say to you this morning, stop it. Don't be like that, right? Like, understand that we need God's help to change. So if this is where you are and it's your default, you need to pray today that it's the last day you're there. You're going to pop right up here to this just and polite and proportional level of love. And to the people in your life, when you move from here, not nice, impolite, to here, then they're going to think, wow, that feels outlandish to us, right? They're going to love it, okay? And you might push back, Mike, are there really people who live down here just impolite and rude and selfish? And the answer is yes, there are. I was driving on the freeway yesterday, and I saw a bumper sticker. It had a kind of an interesting graphic, so I pulled up a little bit closer to see if I could read it, and I couldn't tell what the graphic was, but the words finally came into focus for me, and so the bumper sticker said, "Bite me." And I thought to myself, no thanks. No, but But I was just thinking, what would it take to like get someone to purchase a bumper sticker and then put it on their car and then advertise, right, as long as they drove the car around, this level of sort of impolite, back off, get out of my face, just kind of a rude expression. But yeah, there are people that like that. So if that's where you are, look, today's a great day, pop right here. Because some people want to put nice down, they want to put polite down, but I'm not like that. I think that's fantastic. We live in a world like this right now. If we could imagine a world like this, it would be good. It would be a world where justice did reign. It would be a world, think about a world without crime, right? Because you couldn't steal something. How could you steal something? Stealing's not nice, right? So you couldn't do it. Or, think about all the work that we do Overlake with trafficking, and it just would be non-existent. Why? Because you couldn't oppress another human being. That's not nice. Do you see what I'm saying? So people kind of put down nice, but I'm telling you, nice is a phenomenal improvement over not nice. So you just go, boom, right here. This is a great thing. If you could imagine a world like this, you know what you'd imagine? A world that was filled with justice. But what I'm telling you is that's not the end game. The end game is up here, right? The end game's outlandish love. And if you could imagine a world like this, that's heaven. And that's what we're called to do, is we're called to bring the kingdom of heaven here into this kingdom as well. And I want to talk to you for just a minute about what is probably the most well-known moral code around the globe throughout all history. And it's what Jesus has said. It's his words. It's known as the golden rule. We actually see echoes of the golden rule in almost all cultures and through all kinds of philosophies and in religious teachers. But this is what Jesus says in Matthew 7:12. Do to others whatever you would like them to do to you. This is the essence of all that is taught in the law and the prophets. Do to others whatever you'd like to do unto others, what you would have them do unto you. That's how I learned it. Now, what's interesting to me about this is Jesus says to you and to me, we get to be the initiators in this equation. We get to set the level of the love that's experienced in this world. So if you do unto others down here, it's what you'll receive. You do unto others here, it's what you'll receive. You do unto others here, and you're going to start a movement. And that's what Jesus did. That's the kind of love that he has. That's the way in which he taught. That's the way in which he lived. It is the thing that he started, the movement. It all starts with Jesus. He is the one who taught and modeled outlandish love. So we get to set the level of love that we experience, the level of love that we get to have influence in our world. So how do we start? Well, if you're filling in the blanks, just a couple of simple things to think about. Number one, start at home. Start at home. Start in your home. Start with your immediate family. Mother Teresa, I got a couple quotes from her today. She says, love begins at home, and it's not how much we do, but how much love we put into that action. Love, it begins at home. That's where God has us. It's the family. If, as crazy, dysfunctional, whatever, that's where we are. So we're to start there, pour out outlandish love. I knew a quote from Abe Lincoln many years ago. He talked about, I don't care much about a man's religion if his horse doesn't benefit from it. And I thought, oh, that's a neat quote. I'll try to find it. And so I found it this week, and I have it for you. I remembered it a little different than as it is. He actually said, I care not much for a man's religion whose dog and cat are not the better for it. And I just want to tell you, I liked the quote better when it was about a horse. Because I don't own a horse, but I do own a dog. And I'm thinking, Abe, get out of my business. Honestly, it's not that I'm not rude to my dog. I don't mistreat my dog. I'm not down here with my dog, but I'm barely here. It's a polite tolerance is how I view it. And it's funny to me, and this is confession for a moment. I've been in pastoral ministry for 21 years, and I get questions that kind of roll through seasonally. And I wish I would have made a list, because there's some questions that just keep coming back around again and again and again. And two of the top 5 questions that I've been received over the many years of ministry, one has to do with, maybe like sex before marriage, which we won't get into today. But the second of all time, most popular question that I get is, Pastor, will my dog be with me in heaven? And it's a little perplexing to me. The Bible doesn't speak specifically to that issue, but I always begin my answer with a clarifying question to the person asking. I say, do you like your dog? Do you want your dog to be in heaven with you? Because it's really important to recognize that for some of us, that doesn't sound like heaven at all. And for me, honestly, it would be, I feel like, oh, that doesn't sound like heaven. It sounds like the other place. I feel like pet ownership is a form of penance in my life right now. And so it's sort of how I'm working off my atoning for my sins. Anyway, that has nothing to do with my point for today. My point is that when it comes to outlandish love, many people fall prey to the idea that we've got to get in a plane and fly halfway around the world in order to show love. Jesus gives us an opportunity each and every day. Start at home. Next fill-in, very similar, start with your spouse. For those of you who are married, you need to recognize that God has built this into the equation. He wants you to pour outlandish love out on your spouse. He wants your spouse to pour outlandish love out on you. This is the dynamic of marriage that God has in mind for us. Ephesians 5:21 says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. What I love most about this verse is that we're to submit to one another and care for one another and cherish one another and pour outlandish love out on one another, not necessarily out of concern for our spouse, but rather out of this idea of bringing glory and honor to Jesus. Because all of our blessing is from Him, and all of our gifts we've received are from Him, including the gift of our spouse. And so out of reverence for Jesus and glorifying Jesus and understanding that He's the source of love, we're to pour love out on our spouse. And I recognize readily that marriages have all kinds of pressure and all kinds of tension. And there's all kinds of temptation that in our world. I get that. I'm a married man. I walk this road myself. I just want you to understand that God desires us to begin with outlandish love in our home, with our brothers, our sisters, our moms, our dads, and with our spouse. That this is not excluded from the equation. So often, we give our best foot forward outside of the home and outside of our marriage. And then when we're exhausted and depleted, we bring our worst selves to those who we spend the most time with. We need to bring outlandish love into that context. And I say this knowing that there are some here who are married who don't feel like pouring outlandish love out. So it's a challenge. Do it anyway. Ask God to help you. Pour outlandish love out. Oh, they don't respond well to that. Then seek to find a way that they do respond to. Pour it out and pour it out again and pour it out. And again, it's not for your spouse's sake, it's for Christ's sake. Right? To bring glory and honor to Him. So we start in the home, we start with our spouse, and then next we start with your colleagues, with your classmates, with those in the sphere of influence in which God has placed you. Paul writes in Galatians 5, you've been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature, which some do. Oh, I'm free, and then they become selfish. What he says, instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. So in the relationships that God has already naturally, organically built into your life, the relationships of work, your influence in your work group, your influence in your classroom, the influence that you have in the different groups or associations or sports teams or whatever it is that God has placed you in these areas, organically you have this opportunity to build relationship. And in those relationships, pour outlandish love in. Okay? Allow God to use your life to just pour His love out, to spread His love in these different areas, in your home, with your spouse, and in your workplace. Okay. Jesus says in John 15:13, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. No greater love. Jesus taught this, and then he modeled it for us. He laid down his life for his friends. I'm challenging you in this regard that you would lay down a little bit of your life for your spouse. You lay down a little bit of your life in your workplace. Lay down a little bit of your life. You die a little bit to yourself with your kids. You die a little bit to yourself for your parents. Does that make sense? This is how you're showing love. No greater love than to die for your friend. What I'm saying is die a little bit to yourself and pour love. Okay? And the challenge is that God is going to use your life to spread his love in all of the areas that he has given you influence. That he has given you blessing, he's given you favor, you've got these relationships. Now he's going to use your life to pour his love into those areas. So how do we do this? How do we go after outlandish love? A couple of concepts. I want you to think about these, wrestle with them through the week. The first fill-in is that outlandish love means that you're going to have to bless unfairly in your world. Bless unfairly. And I know that catches you a little bit off guard, so let me unpack it a little bit. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. That's what it means to bless unfairly. That you would do for one what you wish you could do for everybody. This is a concept that a pastor, mentor in my world named Andy Stanley has come up with, and I really see the wisdom in this challenge. Sometimes fairness is an awesome thing. And I'll give you one example. I'm a father of 3. So in my home, it is really important that I pour outlandish love out fairly on all 3 of my kids. Does that make sense? It's a divine mandate, if you will, for me to love all 3 of my children, that I would provide for all 3 of my children, that I'd bless all 3 of them. They all have a warm bed to sleep in. They all have, fairly stylish clothes to wear. They all get fed from my table every day, multiple times. Like, you understand this. If I don't love and bless them fairly, then I cease, in some regards, to be communicating love at all. And so you realize that in some contexts, fairness is absolutely the standard that we have to abide by, but not in all. And especially not when this idea of fairness prevents us from doing anything in the world. In other words, sometimes you think to yourself, well, I can't solve that problem across the board, so I'm not going to do anything. I can't take care of all the homeless people, so I'm not going to take care of this one outside my window. I can't serve in all of my kids' classrooms, and so I'm not going to serve in any of them. And suddenly fairness, instead of becoming kind of something that would be awesome to shoot for, it ends up becoming a hurdle that we choose not to jump. And that's why the challenge is that you would bless unfairly, that you would release this idea of fairness. Again, another quote, if you can't feed 100 people, then feed just one. That we do what we can, that we take a step outside of our comfort zone and we seek to bless who we can bless. We seek to love outlandishly the opportunity that God presents us. Even if we can't do everything, we can do something. And I got a story emailed to me this week about an Overlaker. And this story happened in November, and an Overlake man comes out of his home, and he sees that on his street, somebody has been playing baseball with the mailboxes on his street. You know how that goes? The guys come by with a baseball bat, and they destroy mailboxes. And so there were several down, including this man's mailbox and his next-door neighbor's mailbox. They happened to be kind of situated right next to each other, and they both were gone. And so he knew he had to go to Home Depot and get the supplies, and he knew he had to do some work to replace his, but he just thought to himself, I'll put my neighbors in as well. And so instead of buying one, 4x4, he bought 2. Instead of buying one mailbox, he bought 2. And so he went out, he dug 2 holes, he put the 2 poles in, he put the whole thing, even the numbers on the mailbox. He just did it all. His neighbor comes out, neighbor's name was Bob, sort of an older gentleman, lives alone. He comes out and he sees his new mailbox and he begins to weep. He tells the Overlake man, "You're the best neighbor I have ever had." And as far as we know, Bob does not have any kind of a faith background, but he knows that this man goes to Overlake. And so we don't know where it's going to go in the future. But you see, what's interesting is he couldn't replace all the mailboxes on his street, but he could replace one. And it made an incredible difference in that man's life. Right? This idea of releasing the idea of fairness so we can bless unfairly. I heard a story this week about a gal named Katie. Katie Davis just actually published a book called Kisses from Katie. And it's her life story, got a hold of her heart at an early age, really stirred her, and she just loves Jesus radically. And so a couple of years ago, she took a mission trip to Uganda and fell in love with the country. Fell in love with the opportunity that she felt God prompting her to invest in the community, to better the community. So she's lived there for a couple of years. She's 21 years old now. But in the last couple of years, she has been able to invest in a local school there, and she's been able to help a few individuals, including this journey that she's on. As a 21-year-old woman, she has adopted 14 Ugandan kiddos. That's pretty radical. And she writes this. She says, "I have learned that I will not change the world. Jesus will do that. I can, however, change the world for one person. I can change the world for 14 little girls, and for 400 school children, and for a sick and dying grandmother, and for a malnourished, neglected, abused 5-year-old. And if one person sees the love of Christ in me, it is worth every minute. In fact, it is worth spending my life for." Isn't that beautiful? I heard a story, this was just a couple of weeks ago, that an Overlake mom, single mom and child, they lost their home. And actually it's a story we've been hearing with some degree of regularity at Overlake. And so they lost their home, but another Overlake family heard that they had lost their home, and so they opened theirs. Now this other Overlake family is a family, I think they're a family of 4. They live in a 2-bedroom apartment. So things were a little crowded, but they said, "You know what? We see this need, and we love you, and we would want to invite you into our home." That's outlandish love. Now, as I share these stories, my thought is this. I think that there are maybe 1 or 2 of you who would be ready to go on an adventure like Katie Davis, where you're like, "You know what? That kind of radical, selfless adventure, going around the world, making this profound difference, pouring my life out, that sounds like something I'm ready to do." And I just want you to know, Overlake, we love that, and we want to champion you on that, and we want to encourage you and support you if that's what you feel like God's calling you to do. But I also know that there are hundreds of you who could raise your hand and say, "You know what, I've got an extra bedroom in my home. I could open my home temporarily and house somebody in need." I want you to see how scalable this idea of outlandish love is. That honestly, it could be putting a mailbox in for a neighbor, or it could be adopting a child. Do you see that? But these are expressions of love, and you can't do it for everyone, right? You've got to recognize this idea. Even Katie she adopted 14. That's amazing. I've adopted 1. That blows me away. But the idea is, right, you go, "Oh, that's amazing," but it's still 14. There are more kids that need adopted, right? You can't adopt all. You can't solve the problem, but what you can do is something. What is it that God's calling you to do? Who is he calling you to love? And then choose to bless that person, to give that love, and give it with, you got to release this idea of fairly. You can't do it fairly. Every time you bless, it's going to be unfairly. The other thing I want to challenge you to do is when you pour your love out, when you bless someone, when you give a gift, when you just show this kindness, you have to release the response that you get. It can't be about the response that you receive. A couple of reasons for that. One is because there are times when you will do some small kindness and it will blow the person away. right? You don't know what they've been praying about. You don't know what they've been struggling with. So you'll do the small kindness. It will be exactly what they need in that moment, and they'll just be in tears on their knees saying, you don't know. You saved my life today. But then there'll be other times when you pour all of this energy in and all of this sacrifice and all of this generosity in, and you give it all as this huge love gift, and they're like, oh, thanks. And you're like, really? Oh my God. And then, oh yeah, no, I said thanks, didn't I? You know, like, oh my gosh. Well, think about it this way. Jesus pours out his love over you day after day after day. How often do we not give him the gratitude that he deserves? Jesus pours his love out over the entire world. Day after day after day, his invitation, his lavish grace, his common grace, he pours it all out again and again and again. How often does he pour out his outlandish love only to have it ignored, right? That's the road that we walk. If we want to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, we got to release the response. We got to bless unfairly. The next fill-in is that our challenge with outlandish love is to identify a need and then overwhelm it with love. Identify a need and then just overwhelm it with love. A quote, intense love does not measure, it just gives, right? This idea of finding a need and then seeing how you can just bury the thing with a response of love. And I'll give you one example from my own life, a small example. Last spring, I was volunteering at my kids' elementary school. And they have this program called the Watchdog Program, and it's just a way to get more dads on campus more often and sort of increases the security factor a little bit, but it's also a way to just have more dads and fathers investing in the lives of elementary kids. And I think it's a great program, and I recommend it, I do it. And so I was there, and I was checking in the morning, signing in and get my visitor badge. And I heard the principal talking to one of the administrators. And she was lamenting the reality that there are all the schools in the district, I think it's 26 schools, but because of budget cuts, there's only one groundskeeper for all of the schools. And she was talking about how bad their campus looked outside. And it was true. Weeds in every flower bed, over waist high. All of the lawns looked shaggy and unkept. It made the school look like not an inviting, fun place for education and for friendship and that kind of thing. So I had a thought. I said, well, would you mind if I showed up next Friday and pulled a few weeds? And the principal said, oh, that'd be great. What she didn't realize is that I'm the pastor at Overlake Christian Church. And even more, that I have a staff that I can orchestrate. So I was able to show up the next Friday, and there were about 20 of us that descended on that campus. And we have a landscaping crew that takes care of this property, and I decided to have them show up at the school as well. So we were able to show up from 9 to 12, and we just totally were able to transform every flower bed on this campus. And we were piling all the weeds in those 60-gallon trash bags. And we had over 50 bags. We filled a dumpster and then buried the dumpster in these bags, right? It was so awesome, and just to see the face of all these teachers as they were coming in. And I said goodbye to my crew at noon, but then I came back after lunch, and I finished blowing off all the sidewalks, and I finished mowing a couple of lawns. At the end of the day, the kindergarten teacher came out, and she said that there were 2 kids in her class that came up to her and asked her, are they building us a new school? It looks so different. And as a response, I did get a good response. I got a thank you note from every kid in the school. So I want you to see that, like, the idea, there's a need, let's overwhelm it. Now, just so you know, when it comes to fairness, Overlake also goes after a serve day every summer where we launch 1,000 of you out into the community, all kinds of schools and all kinds of parks, all kinds of places that we want to come and make an incredible difference. We do this because we do care about the entire community. We want to be fair with our love. But I want you to see that here's one need we identified, we just buried, we overwhelmed it with love. I heard stories this last season of Thanksgiving and Christmas where small groups understand that there's a need within the small group. Somebody has a need. Somebody's having a health issue. Somebody's having a financial crisis. And so they just literally, it's like these small groups are saying, we're going to bring love bombs and bomb this need to smithereens, right? Just think of it. You know, like just love, just taking, does that work? Does that metaphor work for you guys? I love, yeah, you know, destroy the need with love, just overwhelm it, bomb it, and that's what we want to go after. We want to, this outlandish love that just pours out again and again and again. And it actually brings us to the last thought here. The challenge with outlandish love is that you would go at it together. That you would go at it in partnership, that you would go at it in a group, in a community, because outlandish love's not easy. And if you try to chart this course by yourself, you're eventually going to burn out. You're going to get tired. You're going to get discouraged. You might become hard-hearted to needs in this world when that happens. And so the antidote for that is to go at it together. Community and mission are inseparable. They go hand in hand. And so that's why Overlake makes a huge deal about life groups. That's why you'll see people out there with these scarves on today. If you are not in a life group, let us get you signed up for a life group today. There's something in your handout about how you can do this online on your own. But just understand, we want to provide every resource for you and help you take every step so that you can live life in a vibrant community of faith, so you can go at these things, worship first, and outlandish love together in community. Okay. Now, I mentioned before that Jesus is our model and he's our source for all outlandish love. You need to think about it in this way. If outlandish love is an infection, if it is a virus that has impacted the entire planet, the kingdom of God, then you need to know it can all be traced back to patient zero. That's Jesus. Jesus is the most outlandishly loving, the one who loved most outlandishly that has ever existed, will ever exist. And you just have to think for a moment about his ministry on this earth and what it was and the impact that he made in 3 short years. It's so incredible to think about Jesus as patient zero of outlandish love. Just think for a moment. I mean, he starts his ministry off by turning mundane water into fine wine at a party. That's outlandish. And then he drove an evil spirit out of a guy and put it into a herd of pigs. That's outlandish. And then he healed a guy's mother-in-law, and that guy thought it was outlandish. And then he healed a guy with leprosy by touching him, by doing something that was radically opposed and even illegal in that day. He healed a gal who touched the edge of his robe. He healed a guy who wasn't even there in his presence. He calmed a storm. He brought a girl back to life. He fed 5,000. Then he fed 4,000. Then he spit on the ground, made mud, slopped it in a guy's eyes, and healed his blindness. That's outlandish. He healed Lazarus from the dead. He healed the ear of a soldier who was there in the garden to arrest him. And the most outlandish thing, that this is my favorite, is when he paid a tax by telling Peter to go fish and then open the fish's mouth and find the coin and pay the tax from the coin found in the mouth of a fish, and Peter did. That's outlandish. But by far, without any question, without any comment, without any argument, the most outlandish thing of all that Jesus ever did was when he was nailed to a cross, when his beard had been plucked from his face, when his back was raw with the lashes of a whip, when his brow was bloodied because there was this crown of thorns thrust down and embedded into his flesh. He looked down on the very men that had nailed the spikes into his hands and feet and said, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." Stretched out on the cross of Calvary, he looked down through the ages to Mike Howerton, and he saw all of my shallowness and selfishness, all of my vanity and my greed, my lust. Anytime that I would ever do anything rude or thoughtless, anytime I would ever build my own kingdom and not his kingdom, anytime I would ever love myself and not someone else, he saw all of that and he said, "Father, forgive him. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he says that for you too. This is outlandish love. It is in no way proportional to the love that we have offered him. And yet he pours it out over us again and again and again. His grace is undeserved. His love is unmerited. We are not worthy of it, but we worship because of it. Our response is that we are insanely grateful for his outlandish love in our lives. And therefore, we open our lives so that it can flow into us and then through us into our world. And I want to give you sort of the Outlandish Love Manifesto. And I want you to jot down one or two of these phrases that speaks most clearly into your life, something that you can meditate on, pray about, and then act on. And this is the Outlandish Love Manifesto. It simply says, outlandish love is an act of service that is strikingly out of the ordinary. Outlandish love is going to require a sacrifice of your time, money, or talent. Outlandish love can feel 10 times harder when you're loving someone in your everyday life. Outlandish love always exceeds the proportion for which it is being displayed. Outlandish love is an out-of-the-way kind of love. Outlandish love is an extravagant way of caring for someone. Outlandish love is an unconventional way for showing God's love to others. Outlandish love is an uncommon way people act toward each other that we want to make common here at Overlake. Outlandish love is something that you may not be thanked for, but that doesn't matter. Outlandish love is acted out with whimsicality. Outlandish love leaks Jesus. And so you hear this challenge and you think to yourself,